The first crack in my perfectly constructed world appeared on a Tuesday evening in September. I remember it with painful clarity, the way the setting sun painted my office walls in shades of amber, the gentle hum of my computer's cooling fan, and the seemingly innocent notification that lit up my phone's screen. 25 years of marriage, and all it took was one misplaced message to begin unraveling everything I thought I knew about my life. I'm Marcus Reynolds, and at 53, I thought I had it all figured out. A successful construction company I'd built from the ground up, a beautiful colonial home in Boston's suburbs, and what I believed was a rock-solid marriage to Claire, my college sweetheart. Our kids were grown and thriving, Jessica in medical school and Thomas making waves in Silicon Valley. I was living the American dream, or so I thought. The message wasn't meant for me. It was intended for someone saved in Claire's phone as Book Club, Sarah. But Sarah hadn't been part of Claire's book club for months. She'd moved to Florida last spring. I knew this because Claire had mentioned it over dinner, lamenting the loss of one of her closest friends. Yet here was a message, clearly intimate in nature, discussing plans for a weekend getaway. My fingers hovered over the phone's screen, a sudden tremor making it difficult to hold steady. The message preview was innocent enough, "Can't wait for this weekend. Everything's arranged as discussed." But it was the contact name that set off alarm bells. Why maintain a fake contact months after Sarah's departure? I didn't open the message. Instead, I placed the phone face down on my desk, trying to focus on the construction bid proposals spread before me. But the words blurred together, my mind racing through the past few months, searching for signs I might have missed. Claire's new yoga classes on Thursday evenings. The business trips that seemed to run longer than usual. The password changes on her personal laptop. Mr. Reynolds. Maria, my assistant, appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned. The meeting with the Johnson project team starts in 5 minutes. I nodded, grateful for the interruption. Thank you, Maria. I'll be right there. As she turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of sympathy in her eyes. Did I look as shaken as I felt? Had others noticed something I'd been blind to? The meeting passed in a blur. I heard myself discussing timelines, budgets, and material costs, operating on autopilot while my mind circled back to that message like a moth drawn to a flame. I'd built my company on attention to detail, on noticing the small things that could bring down an entire project. How had I missed the warning signs in my own home? That evening, I drove home slowly, taking the long route through the winding suburban streets. The autumn leaves were just beginning to turn, spots of red and gold appearing among the green. Claire's car was in the driveway when I arrived, parked at an angle she knew I disliked. It made it difficult to pull my truck in beside it. Inside, she was preparing dinner, humming softly to herself. The kitchen smelled of garlic and rosemary. She was making my favorite, herb-crusted lamb chops. Was this guilt manifesting in culinary form, or was I reading too much into everything now? "You're home late," she said, not turning from the stove. "Rough day at the office?" I studied her back, the familiar curve of her shoulders beneath her cashmere sweater. 25 years of memories flooded through my mind, our wedding day, the birth of our children, countless Sunday mornings solving crossword puzzles together in bed. How many of those memories were real, and how many were carefully constructed illusions? "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "there's something we need to discuss." She turned then, wooden spoon in hand, her expression neutral. Too neutral. "Oh. What about?" "I got an interesting message on my phone today," I began, watching her face carefully. "From Book Club, Sarah." The wooden spoon clattered to the floor, splattering red wine sauce across the pristine tiles. In that moment of startled recognition, I saw everything I needed to know written across her face. But it was what happened next that truly shocked me. Claire didn't deny it. She didn't try to explain or make excuses. Instead, she laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. "Well," she said, reaching for her phone, I suppose that saves me the trouble of having this conversation later this week. The lamb chops began to burn, filling the kitchen with acrid smoke, but neither of us moved to save them. We stood frozen in our positions, the island counter between us like a battlefield's no man's land, while 25 years of trust and love went up in flames alongside our ruined dinner. And then she spoke words that would set in motion a chain of events neither of us could have predicted. "You're not the only one who's been keeping secrets, Marcus. Maybe it's time we both laid our cards on the table." The kitchen's smoke detector pierced the air with its shrill warning, but the sound felt distant, muffled by the thundering of blood in my ears. Claire's words hung between us like poison gas, corrupting every cherished memory with their implications. Secrets. The word itself was a maze of mirrors, reflecting and distorting everything I thought I knew about our life together. I watched as she calmly moved to silence the alarm, her movements precise and controlled, too controlled for someone whose marriage was imploding. The acrid smell of burnt meat lingered, a fitting metaphor for the charred remains of our relationship. When she turned back to face me, her blue eyes held a hardness I'd never seen before. "Sit down, Marcus," she said, gesturing to our kitchen table, the same mahogany piece where we'd shared thousands of family dinners, helped our children with homework, celebrated victories and consoled defeats. Now it felt like an interrogation table, with the pendant light above casting harsh shadows across our faces. "I'd rather stand," I replied, my contractor's instincts kicking in. Never negotiate from a position of weakness. Never give up the higher ground. Claire shrugged, a subtle gesture that somehow managed to convey both dismissal and superiority. "Sweet yourself. But you might want to brace yourself for what I'm about to show you." She pulled out her phone, her manicured fingers dancing across the screen with practiced efficiency. "Before you start your confessions," I interrupted, my voice rough with suppressed emotion, "why don't you explain the message I received? Who's really saved under Sarah's name in your phone?" A smile played at the corners of her mouth, not the warm expression I'd fallen in love with in college, but something calculated and sharp. "His name is James Sullivan. And he's not just my lover, Marcus. He's your business partner's son." The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. James Sullivan, 35 years old, recently divorced, and the heir apparent to Sullivan Construction, my company's biggest competitor and occasional joint venture partner. I'd watched that kid grow up, attended his high school graduation party, hired him for summer internships. Now he was sleeping with my wife. How long? The question scraped out of my throat. 8 months, Claire answered without hesitation. But that's not the important part. You see, James and I share more than just a bed. We share information. Specifically, information about certain, creative accounting practices at Reynolds Construction. The room tilted sideways as the implications sank in. My hands gripped the kitchen counter, knuckles white with tension. "You've been spying on me." "Gathering evidence," she corrected, her tone almost professorial. "Bank statements, bid documents, emails. It's amazing what you can find when you know where to look. And you really should have changed your laptop password more often than our anniversary date." Rage and fear warred in my chest, each fighting for dominance. "If you're trying to blackmail me dash." "Blackmail?" Claire laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Oh no, darling. This isn't blackmail. This is revenge." She turned her phone's screen toward me, displaying a familiar email thread, one that should have been permanently deleted years ago. "Do you remember Elena Martinez?" The name sent ice through my veins. Elena Martinez, my former project manager, the woman who discovered discrepancies in our bidding process 5 years ago. The woman who'd threatened to expose everything. The woman who'd mysteriously resigned and moved across the country after a substantial bonus payment. "Elena was my best friend in college," Claire continued, her voice deadly quiet. "We lost touch after graduation, but reconnected on Facebook 4 years ago. She told me everything, Marcus. About the threats, the manipulation, how you destroyed her career when she tried to do the right thing. And then I started looking deeper. My mind raced through implications, possibilities, escape routes. The company's books would withstand surface scrutiny, but a detailed forensic audit? And with an insider helping to guide the investigation? What do you want? I managed to ask. Claire's smile widened, showing teeth. Want? I want what Elena never got, justice. Monday morning, this evidence goes to the FBI's white-collar crime division. Your company, your reputation, everything you've built on lies and corruption, it all comes crashing down. You'll destroy yourself too, I warned. Half of everything I own is yours. You think I care about money? She laughed again, bitter and cold. I've already transferred my assets. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. Did you even notice the paperwork you signed last month? I've been planning this for years, Marcus. Years. I stared at this stranger wearing my wife's face, this avenging angel who'd slept beside me while plotting my destruction. But as the initial shock began to fade, something else nagged at my consciousness, a detail that didn't quite fit. Years of planning, I repeated slowly. But James Sullivan only came into the picture 8 months ago. Why him? Why now? For the first time, I saw Claire's perfect composure crack, just slightly. A flicker of something, uncertainty. Fear. Crossed her face before she could mask it. That's all you need to know, she said, too quickly. It's over, Marcus. By this time next week, you'll be lucky if you're not wearing handcuffs. But I'd spent decades reading people, knowing when they were hiding something. Claire's revenge plot was devastating, but it wasn't the whole story. James Sullivan wasn't just a random choice for an affair, he was a piece of a larger puzzle, one that Claire seemed suddenly reluctant to reveal. As I stood there in our ruined kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of my marriage and the smoke of burnt dreams, a cold clarity descended. Claire wasn't the only one with secrets, and she wasn't the only one who knew how to play a long game. If she wanted to turn this into a war, she'd learn that I hadn't built and protected my empire by playing nice. One last question, I said, my voice steady. Does Robert Sullivan know what his son is up to? The flash of panic in Claire's eyes told me everything I needed to know. I had 48 hours until Monday morning, and I intended to use every minute of them. The game wasn't over, it was just beginning. I spent that night in my office, surrounded by the edifice of success I'd built on a foundation of shifting sand. The city lights spread out below my 20th floor window like scattered diamonds on black velvet, beautiful, cold, and ultimately worthless. Just like my marriage. Just like everything I'd believed about my life. Claire's revelations had shattered my world, but as the initial shock subsided, years of business instinct began to reassert themselves. Something wasn't adding up. Robert Sullivan was many things, ruthless competitor, shrewd businessman, occasional ally, but he'd never struck me as a man who'd risk his company's reputation on a revenge plot orchestrated by his son's lover. There had to be more to this story. At 3 a.m, I found myself staring at Elena Martinez's old personnel file, spread across my desk like tarot cards promising to reveal the future through fragments of the past. 5 years ago, she'd been a rising star in my company, brilliant, dedicated, principled. Too principled, as it turned out. When she'd discovered our creative bidding practices on government contracts, she'd come to me directly, expecting, what? That I'd confess. Reform. Surrender everything I'd built. You did what you had to do, I whispered to my reflection in the darkened window, but the words rang hollow. The truth was, I destroyed Elena's career with the same methodical precision I used to demolish outdated buildings, identifying structural weaknesses, applying pressure at key points, watching it all collapse in a controlled implosion. The bonus payment had really been hush money, accompanied by subtle threats about her brother's pending drug charges. She'd taken the money and disappeared. Or so I'd thought. My fingers flew across the keyboard, searching through old emails, bank records, connecting dots I should have seen years ago. Elena's resignation had come just 2 months after Claire's sudden interest in the company's financial records. Not suspicious at the time, why would it be? Claire had always played the role of supportive business wife perfectly, showing just enough interest to seem engaged without asking probing questions. But now, looking at the timeline with fresh eyes, patterns emerged. Claire's book club meetings had started shortly after Elena's departure. The same book club that had supposedly disbanded when Sarah moved to Florida. The same book club that... Jesus Christ, I muttered, pulling up an old calendar entry. The book club had met every third Thursday, the same day as Robert Sullivan's private poker game, the one where major players in the construction industry gathered to drink expensive scotch and discuss market trends. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, scrolling through months of text messages. Claire had always insisted on knowing when I attended these games, claiming she worried about me driving home after drinking. But what if she'd been coordinating with someone else? What if Elena's discovery of our bidding practices hadn't been random at all? A new email notification pinged, sent from an anonymous address, but I recognized the style immediately. Robert Sullivan had always loved his cryptic midnight messages. Breakfast tomorrow. 7 a.m. The usual place. Come alone. I leaned back in my chair, mind racing. Robert Sullivan wouldn't risk meeting unless he had something significant to discuss. Was he aware of his son's involvement with Claire? Of the evidence she'd gathered? Or was there something even bigger at play? The smart move would be to ignore the message. Focus on damage control, call my lawyers, start moving assets. But 25 years of marriage had taught me one thing about Claire: she was meticulous. If she'd been planning this for years, she'd have thought of everything. My only hope lay in discovering what she hadn't planned for, what she couldn't have known. Dawn was breaking over the city when another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I pulled up the building plans for the Sullivan Construction headquarters, specifically, the extensive renovations they'd done 5 years ago. The same year Elena had left. The same year Claire had started asking about company finances. My hands moved automatically, typing in the project number, accessing files I hadn't thought about in years. There it was, buried in thousands of pages of permits and specifications. A small structural change, barely noticeable unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. A change that Elena Martinez had questioned, right before everything went to hell. Son of a bitch, I breathed, staring at the screen. If I was right about what I was seeing, this went way beyond creative accounting or rigged bids. This was something that could bring down not just my company, but half the construction industry in Boston. The question was, did Claire know what she'd stumbled into? Was Elena's crusade for justice really about my corrupt practices, or was there something more sinister at the heart of all this? And most importantly, what role were the Sullivans really playing in this elaborate game? My phone buzzed again, another anonymous email, but not from Robert this time. The subject line froze the blood in my veins: Elena Martinez's autopsy report, 2019. Autopsy report? Elena wasn't dead. She'd moved to Seattle. She had a LinkedIn profile. With trembling fingers, I opened the attachment, and the last illusion of control I had crumbled into dust. Because staring back at me was irrefutable proof that Elena Martinez had never made it to Seattle. She'd never left Boston at all. And suddenly, my wife's calculated revenge plot took on a much darker, more terrifying dimension. As the sun rose over the city, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, I realized I wasn't just fighting to save my company anymore. I was fighting to survive. And my breakfast meeting with Robert Sullivan might very well determine which of us would still be standing when this war was over. The Morton Steakhouse private dining room held the stale perfume of power, leather, aged whiskey, and the acrid taste of secrets too dangerous to speak above a whisper. Robert Sullivan sat at our usual table, his massive frame somehow diminished in the gray morning light that filtered through heavy curtains. At 72, he still carried himself with the authority of a man who'd built empires, but there was something different in his eyes today, a haunted quality I recognized from my own mirror. "You look like shit, Marcus," he said by way of greeting, gesturing to the chair across from him. The waitress appeared silently, filling my coffee cup with practiced efficiency before melting away. Nobody came to Morton's at 7 a.m. for the breakfast. This was where deals were made, careers destroyed, and apparently, where I would learn just how deep this conspiracy really went. Elena Martinez is dead. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. The autopsy report burned in my phone like a loaded gun, waiting to be fired. Robert's expression didn't change, but his hands, those massive, calloused builder's hands that had shaped Boston's skyline, trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee. "You weren't supposed to find that out." "Not yet." The rage that had been simmering in my chest since Claire's revelations threatened to boil over. "Did you know? All this time, did you know what really happened to her?" "No." He laughed, a harsh sound like breaking concrete. "Marcus, I arranged it." The words hit me with physical force, driving the air from my lungs. My coffee cup clattered against its saucer, dark liquid splashing across pristine white tablecloth like blood on snow. "You, what?" Elena Martinez discovered something she wasn't supposed to find. Something bigger than your creative bidding practices or my tax arrangements. Robert's voice dropped lower, forcing me to lean in. "She found proof of what we did in '98. The Harrison Tower Project." The name sent ice through my veins. Harrison Tower, my first major project as lead contractor, the building that had put Reynolds Construction on the map. The project that had made my fortune and haunted my nightmares in equal measure. "That was ruled an accident," I whispered, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow they sounded. The collapse during construction that had killed 3 workers, tragic, but not unusual in those days. The investigation had cleared us. The families had been compensated. The dead had been buried along with their secrets. "Elena found the original structural plans," Robert continued, his words dropping like stones into still water. "The ones we altered after the collapse. She didn't just have evidence of current corruption, Marcus. She had proof that we'd committed murder." The room spun around me as decades of carefully buried guilt erupted to the surface. We'd been young then, hungry for success, willing to cut corners to save money. When the support beams had failed exactly as our engineers had warned they might. "So you killed her." My voice sounded strange in my ears, distant and hollow. "To protect our secret." Robert's expression hardened. "I protected all of us. You included." But Elena had already told someone about her discovery. Someone who's been planning revenge ever since. Claire. The name tasted like ashes in my mouth. "Claire," he confirmed. "But not just Claire. You see, Elena Martinez wasn't just your wife's college friend. She was James Sullivan's fiancée. My son was going to marry her, right up until she disappeared. Right up until I had her killed." The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. James and Claire's affair wasn't about love or lust, it was about revenge. A son avenging his lost love, a wife punishing her corrupt husband, both of them united in their hatred of the men who destroyed Elena Martinez. "Why tell me this now?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Robert pulled an envelope from his jacket and slid it across the table. Inside was a single photograph, grainy security camera footage showing Claire and James meeting with someone in what looked like a parking garage. The timestamp was from 2 days ago. "Because," Robert said heavily, "they're not just planning to expose us. According to my sources, they've arranged a meeting with the FBI on Monday. But before that..." He tapped the photograph with one thick finger. "They're planning to tie up loose ends. Starting with you. They're going to kill me." The words felt surreal, disconnected from reality. They're going to make it look like suicide. The guilty businessman, exposed for his crimes, taking the coward's way out. Very neat, very believable. Especially with the evidence Claire's gathered about your corruption. I stared at the photograph, at the shadowy third figure whose face was just out of frame. Who are they meeting with? The same person who helped them arrange Elena's accident 5 years ago. The same person who's been pulling strings in the background this entire time. Robert's face aged a decade as he spoke. My wife. James's mother. Margaret. The revelation struck like a physical blow. Margaret Sullivan, the quiet, dignified woman who'd hosted charity galas and Christmas parties. Who'd comforted Claire after my countless business trips and late nights at the office. Who'd lost her own sister to a construction accident 30 years ago. She's been orchestrating this whole thing, Robert continued, his voice heavy with defeat. Using James and Claire as her weapons, playing all of us like pieces on a chessboard. Elena's death wasn't just about protecting our secret, it was the catalyst Margaret needed to set her grand revenge in motion. Why are you telling me this? I demanded. Why warn me? Robert's eyes met mine, and in them I saw the same desperate calculation I'd been wrestling with since Claire's revelations. Because I love my son, corrupt as he is. Because Margaret's revenge won't stop with you and me, she wants to burn down everything we've built, everyone we care about. And because. He hesitated, then pushed another envelope across the table. Because I have proof that Elena Martinez didn't die 5 years ago. At least, not the way everyone thinks she did. My hands shook as I opened the second envelope, and what I saw inside changed everything I thought I knew about betrayal, revenge, and the true cost of justice. The game hadn't just changed, it had transformed into something far more dangerous than I could have imagined. And I had less than 48 hours to prevent a tragedy decades in the making. The second envelope contained a truth so devastating it rewrote not just my past, but the very foundation of who I thought I was. Elena Martinez wasn't just alive, she was Margaret Sullivan's prisoner, held captive in a private medical facility for 5 years, kept in a drug-induced twilight state while her very existence became a weapon in an elaborate game of revenge. I sat in my parked car outside Morton's, Robert's final words echoing in my skull like funeral bells. Margaret didn't want Elena dead. She wanted to use her. The same way she's been using all of us. The morning sun felt obscene against my skin, too bright, too normal for a world that had just tilted on its axis. My phone buzzed, Claire, her name on the screen a mockery of 25 years of shared life. I let it ring, watching until her name faded to black. The woman I'd married, the life we'd built, even the guilt I'd carried, it was all part of Margaret Sullivan's grand design, pieces arranged on her board with the patience of a spider weaving its web. The revelation about Elena's fate had shattered something fundamental inside me, but in its place, something else was crystallizing, harder, colder, more purposeful than mere revenge. The man I'd been 24 hours ago, with his comfortable delusions and manageable sins, was dead. In his place stood someone who finally understood the true geometry of betrayal. I pulled out the burner phone Robert had given me, dialing the number scrawled on a piece of Morton's stationery. 3 rings, then a voice I'd never thought I'd hear again. Hello, Marcus. Elena Martinez's voice was thin, fragile, but unmistakably alive. I wondered when you'd finally figure it out. My hand tightened on the phone until my knuckles went white. Elena. I'm so sorry. She finished, her laugh like broken glass. Sorry you destroyed my career. Sorry you threatened my brother. Or sorry you left me to Margaret's tender mercies for 5 years. Each word was a precise incision, cutting away the layers of justification I'd wrapped around my guilt. All of it, I managed. Everything. Your guilt is useless to me, she said flatly. But your help, that might be worth something. Margaret plans to kill me once she's finished with you and Robert. I'm the loose end she can't afford to leave dangling. My mind raced, contractor's instincts meshing with newfound desperation. The facility where she's keeping you, it's connected to the Harrison Tower project somehow, isn't it? That's why she chose it. Very good. Elena's voice held a ghost of her old analytical precision. You always were quick with patterns, Marcus. Yes, it's the old Sullivan Medical Research Center, built on the same foundations as Harrison Tower. Margaret's idea of poetic justice, I suppose. Keeping me buried in the same ground where your lies are hidden. The pieces clicked together with terrible clarity. The structural changes I'd noticed in the renovation plans 5 years ago, they weren't just covering up old sins, they were creating new ones. Secret rooms, hidden access points, an entire shadow facility beneath the legitimate surface. Elena, I stopped, realizing with sudden clarity that no words could bridge the chasm of betrayal between us. Instead, I asked, what do you need me to do? Claire and James planned to visit me tomorrow night, before their FBI meeting. Margaret always comes with them, it's part of her ritual, watching them confront me, feeding off their pain like some emotional vampire. It's the only time all the players are in one place. A trap, I said, understanding dawning. You want me to spring it? I want justice, Elena corrected. Real justice, not Margaret's twisted version. Not Claire's revenge fantasy. The truth about Harrison Tower, about what happened to me, about all of it. And I want my life back. I thought about the evidence Claire had gathered, the facts that would come out if she went to the FBI. My company, my reputation, my freedom, all of it would be destroyed. But sitting there in my car, listening to the voice of a woman I'd helped condemn to a living death, I realized none of that mattered anymore. Send me the facility's layout, I said. Everything you know about their security, their patterns. If we're going to do this, we do it right. Just like old times. Elena's voice held a bitter edge. You always did prefer to control every detail of a project. No, I replied, feeling the weight of transformation settling over me like armor. This time we do it your way. This time, we build something true. As I ended the call, another text came through from Claire, we need to talk. One last time. For old time's sake. I stared at the message, understanding its true meaning with perfect clarity. My wife was offering me one last chance to walk into their trap willingly, to play my assigned role in Margaret's grand production. To die with dignity, perhaps, rather than be hunted down. But dignity belonged to the old Marcus Reynolds, the man who'd built his life on compromise and corruption. The man who'd sacrificed Elena Martinez to protect his secrets. That man had died in Morton's private dining room, surrounded by the ghosts of his lies. I typed back a single word, tomorrow. Then I started my car and headed toward the Sullivan Medical Research Center. I had 24 hours to prepare for the performance of my life. And this time, I wasn't just fighting to survive, I was fighting to become someone worthy of survival. The autumn sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the city streets. Somewhere in those shadows, Margaret Sullivan was watching her pieces move across the board, confident in her decades-long strategy. She'd written this story in betrayal and blood, casting all of us in roles she'd chosen with calculating precision. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail: sometimes the pawns learn to play the game themselves. The Sullivan Medical Research Center rose before me like a monument to calculated cruelty, its modernist glass facade reflecting the blood-orange sunset of what might be my final day. I sat in my car, watching shadows lengthen across the parking lot, each passing moment another heartbeat closer to the confrontation that would either redeem or destroy me. Elena's blueprints had revealed the facility's secrets, a labyrinth of hidden corridors beneath the legitimate surface, a perfect metaphor for the layers of deception that had brought us all to this moment. In my breast pocket, a thumb drive held every dark secret I'd accumulated over decades in the construction industry, not just my sins, but everyone's. The nuclear option, as Robert had called it. Insurance, I'd told myself, but really it was something else, ammunition for the war I hadn't known I was fighting. My phone buzzed with Claire's message, "We're ready for you." Such simple words to herald the end of a 25-year marriage. I closed my eyes, letting memories wash over me, our wedding day, the birth of our children, countless small moments of shared joy that now felt like elaborately staged scenes in Margaret Sullivan's grand production. The security guard at the entrance barely glanced at my contractor's ID badge, another piece in place, courtesy of Robert's final act of rebellion against his wife's machinations. The service elevator hummed as it carried me down to the sublevel where Elena had spent 5 years as a living ghost, her existence both proof of our crimes and leverage for Margaret's revenge. I found them waiting in what had once been a research lab, now converted into a sterile prison. Claire stood by the observation window, her elegant profile harsh in the fluorescent light. James Sullivan lounged against a monitoring station, trying to project casualness but betraying tension in every line of his body. And there was Margaret, exactly as Elena had described her, radiating a quiet malevolence that made the room feel airless, like a sealed tomb. But it was Elena who drew my eye, sitting in a medical chair, looking simultaneously fragile and indestructible. 5 years of captivity had hollowed her cheeks and silvered her hair, but her eyes burned with the same fierce intelligence that had once threatened to expose our corruption. "Marcus." Claire's voice held no trace of the woman I'd loved. "Right on time." "Always was punctual," I replied, letting my gaze sweep the room, noting positions, distances, angles, the contractor's instinct for spatial relationships serving a darker purpose now. "Though I think we're all running a bit behind schedule, aren't we, Margaret?" Margaret Sullivan's smile didn't reach her eyes. "How much has Robert told you?" "Everything." I moved further into the room, positioning myself carefully. "About Elena. About your sister's death in '95. About how you've spent 30 years plotting revenge against an entire industry. Quite the long game." "Justice," Margaret corrected softly. "Not revenge. My sister died because men like you and Robert valued profit over human life. Elena nearly exposed you, so you tried to destroy her. Just like you destroy everything that threatens your corrupt little empire." "And Claire? James? What are they in your grand design, weapons or witnesses?" "They're survivors," Margaret said, her voice taking on a zealot's fervor. "People whose lives were shattered by your greed. I simply helped them channel their pain into purpose." I laughed then, a harsh, broken sound that seemed to startle everyone in the room. "Is that what you think you did? You didn't give them purpose, Margaret. You infected them with your obsession. You turned my wife into a stranger and your son into a killer." "Careful, Marcus," James warned, straightening from his casual pose. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket, exactly as Elena had predicted. "Or what?" I challenged, taking another step forward. "You'll kill me. That's been the plan all along, hasn't it? Stage my suicide, use Claire's evidence to destroy what's left of my reputation, and then—" I turned to Margaret, watching her mask of control crack slightly. "Then Elena has a tragic accident, eliminating the last witness to your 30-year crusade." "You understand nothing," Claire spat, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "I understand everything now." Another step, another careful adjustment of position. "I understand that Margaret didn't just want revenge, she wanted to recreate her sister's tragedy with a new cast. Elena's imprisonment, my corruption, your betrayal, it's all an elaborate reenactment. She's not delivering justice, she's directing a play where we all fulfill the roles she assigned us." "Enough." Margaret's composure shattered. "James, finish this." But as James reached for his gun, I pressed a button on my phone. Suddenly, every screen in the lab lit up with security footage, decades of recordings from construction sites, board rooms, private meetings. Margaret Sullivan accepting bribes, arranging accidents, orchestrating Elena's kidnapping. Claire and James plotting my murder. Everything. What is this? Margaret demanded, but her voice had lost its power. Insurance, I replied, another button press sending the footage to every news outlet and law enforcement agency in Boston. Or maybe you'd prefer to call it justice. The next few moments exploded in chaos. James drew his weapon, but Elena, who'd been slowly working free of her restraints as we talked, knocked him off balance. Claire lunged for the emergency alarm, but I was ready, intercepting her with a move that sent us both crashing into the monitoring equipment. In the confusion, Margaret tried to flee, but found Robert Sullivan blocking the doorway, his massive frame filling the space like an avenging angel. "Hello, Margaret," he said softly. "I believe we're overdue for a conversation about family loyalty." When the FBI burst in minutes later, the real FBI, not the compromised agents Margaret had arranged to meet tomorrow, they found a tableau of collapse. James unconscious, Claire in tears, Margaret's mask of control shattered into 1,000 pieces. And Elena, standing on shaking legs but standing nonetheless, her voice strong as she began to tell her story. Hours later, I stood on the roof of the facility, watching dawn break over a city that suddenly felt both foreign and achingly familiar. Everything I'd built was still destroyed, my company, my marriage, my reputation. But as I thought about Elena's words to me before the FBI took her statement, "Sometimes you have to burn it all down to build something true," I realized that destruction wasn't always an ending. Claire would face charges, though lighter ones in exchange for her testimony against Margaret. James and his mother would never see freedom again. Robert would do what he'd always done, survive, adapt, rebuild. As for me, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, my daughter. "Dad, we need to talk. About everything." I stared at those words for a long moment, feeling the weight of truth pressing against my chest like a physical thing. The old Marcus Reynolds would have found a way to hide the darkness, to preserve the illusion of the perfect father. But that man had died in a basement laboratory, surrounded by the ghosts of his sins. "Yes," I typed back. "It's time for the whole truth." The sun climbed higher, painting the city in shades of gold and promise. Somewhere below, Elena was beginning the long process of reclaiming her life. Somewhere across town, my children were grappling with the revelation of who their father really was. And here, on this rooftop, I stood at the intersection of ending and beginning, understanding finally that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about finding the courage to face it honestly. I had lost everything I'd spent a lifetime building. But as I turned to face the new day, I realized I'd gained something far more precious, the chance to build something true, something real, something worthy of the cost of its creation. It was time to begin again.